Okay. I'm down it.
Regulation one. So this is the Human Trafficking Coalition thing.
Hi, let's get started.
Somebody need me.
Jen, I will try to mute that person.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
Hi, let's get started. We will be recording today's webinar. Our first slide has our title with the IDJ and ICADV logos. Welcome to Indiana Disabilities Justice's presentation of Intersections, Racism, Ableism, and Primary Sexual Violence Prevention. Sponsored by Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I am your host Jennifer Milhar-Sick. This next slide has 6 icons: recording, mic, closed captioning, tech support, questions and ASL. We are recording, and the webinar will be posted on our hub shortly. You will also be receiving the slides shortly after the webinar. Please remember to mute your mic. Voice to Print is providing closed captioning available under the closed captioning icon in your Zoom window. You can put tech support and questions in the chat. Luna Language Services is providing ASL. Finally, I am using a text-to-speech program to communicate. I may also speak if I have an impromptu thought. Our basic disclaimer says the information, views, and opinions expressed in this webinar are not necessarily those of our funders. With the
Yeah.
Yeah,
Change the slide.
okay.
One more.
I'm really sorry, Jen.
With the preliminaries out of the way, let's take a look at the structure of our time together. First, we will take 3 minutes to make introductions, followed by foundational definitions and background, which will take 11 minutes. Once we are grounded, we will turn to our phenomenal panel. They will have approximately 60 minutes. To round out our time, there will be 10 minutes for questions and answers, then a brief closing. Our next
Next slide.
Our next slide has pictures of Sierra Olivia Thomas Williams, Deb Brown, and myself. I am pictured hugging my dog with the top half of my brownish blonde hair pulled back. I am a part of the IDJ leadership as well as the webinar coordinator. I was born with cerebral palsy. Sierra is standing wearing a pink sleeveless top, with her hair cascading over her shoulders. Sierra Olivia Thomas Williams, MA, is a prevention specialist at Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence and co-founder of IDJ. She will be helping with chat and technical assistance. Deb Brown is pictured as a white female with blonde hair, large tortoise-shell glasses and black top. She is our captioner from Voice to Print. Check them out at voicetoprint.com. Luna Language Services is providing us with ASL interpreters. They will introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Marla, and I am a white female with gray and purple curly hair about shoulder length and a black shirt with an appropriate plain background.
Hello, my name is Lauren Jeffords. I am a white
female with reddish blonde hair and a black shirt.
Thank you.
Our panelists are awesome social activists Kalila Hainan, Helen Leung, and Olivia Hope. Kalila is pictured as a black, toffee brown skin tones voluptuous-sized woman with brownish-colored hair. She has a MSW and is a women's program coordinator and staff administrative team member at the Center for Nonviolence. As a women's program coordinator with the center, Kalila facilitates women's groups, does case management, and has facilitated professional development training at the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence, ICADV, annual conference. She has also lectured and taught for several universities. From Oakland we have Helen is a queer disabled Asian lived experience expert who advocates for multiply marginalized people impacted by human trafficking. Helen is pictured on the slide as a Chinese American person with fly hair and big glasses smiling in front of a blue and gold background. She also serves as the training associate at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. Helen brings over 10 years of experience in social justice work, nonprofit administration, project management, and direct client service. She holds a BA in Ethnic Studies and History from UC San Diego. In his picture Olivia is dressed in formal attire, seated on a stool smiling while looking off to the side against a purple backdrop. Olivia Hope is a gender nonconforming community advocate with a heart for people. He is a full-time college student at Purdue Fort Wayne majoring in psychology with a minor in religious studies and the LGBTQ+ certificate. At home, Olivia is a parent to a 2-year-old child and in the community, he is involved in various social justice initiatives. One of which is co-founding the Ruach Foundation alongside his mother where mental health care is focused around peer support and community building. We look forward to hearing from them a little later in the webinar where through their lived experiences they will address white supremacy, the healthcare insufficiency, the increased risk of violence, and violence prevention. Before we hear from our panelists, we need to set the context for the discussion today about the intersections of racism, ableism, and sexual violence prevention. Let's start by creating a shared understanding of what we mean. We will begin with definitions. Ableism is a set of beliefs or practices that devalue and discriminate against people with physical, intellectual, or psychiatric disabilities and often rests on the assumption that disabled people need to be fixed in one form or the other. Leah Smith. Next, racism is a form of prejudice that assumes that the members of racial categories have distinctive characteristics and that these differences result in some racial groups being inferior to others. Finally, sexual violence primary prevention. There is continued movement toward implementing prevention strategies across multiple levels of the social ecology and focusing on improving health equity. Prevention strategies that focus on changing community conditions, like ending ableism and racism, create a safe community for everyone. We use the public health approach to end sexual violence, so let's look at that process. The image on the slide is the CDC's 4-step public health approach to violence prevention that we will talk through. The first step is defining the problem. The problem that unites racism, ableism, and sexual violence is power over to control. This means that people who are BIPOC or disabled are subject to being thought of as subhuman by others who do not identify as BIPOC or disabled. This is why sexual violence against these groups is tolerated. Step 2 is identifying risk and protective factors. The communities we are a part of provide both protection from and risks for violence. BIPOC and disabled communities are marginalized, but when you consider the intersections of the two, the risk for violence is exponentially greater than people who live in non-marginalized communities. By ending racism and ableism, we are decreasing the likelihood of multiple forms of violence, including sexual violence. Developing and testing prevention strategies is step 3 in what we are doing now. We can start to change the environment into a more healthy and safe place to live by spreading knowledge and take actionable steps to become more self-aware to address the inequities caused by racism and ableism. The final step is to share what you learned so others can benefit from your successes and your mistakes. We all move through many environments that we can influence throughout each day, like grocery stores, workplaces, parks, and homes. This is where we can start to take the necessary steps to rid our environment of ableism and racism. What does that sexual violence primary prevention strategy look like? Our next slide has an image saying "Stop Sexual Violence" at the top. Inside an octagon shape are the 5 CDC strategies to prevent sexual violence, which include teach skills, provide opportunities, support survivors, promote protective norms, and create protective environments. Let's talk about creating protective environments. Creating protective environments means we are working on uplifting and creating environments that make the desired behavior, equitable relationships, the easy behavior. When we have safe, stable, and nurturing environments, we feel safer and are likely less motivated to use power over as a means to control. A few environmental examples that increase public and personal safety are ramps, affordable and accessible transportation, sidewalks, curb cuts, changes in public policy, and access to appropriate nutrition and health care. Each of these environmental approaches is a method to increase connectedness and social inclusion, protective factors against child maltreatment, youth violence, sexual violence, intimate partner violence, elder abuse, and suicide. When ableism intersects with racism, environments are not safe and there is an even greater loss of power than when they are considered separately.
Right.
When ableism intersects with racism, environments are not safe and there is an even greater loss of power than when they are considered separately. Mia Mingus, a well-known disability and social justice advocate, reminds us that ableism and abled supremacy fundamentally shape our cultures, society, and relationships. You cannot end or fight ableism without also ending and fighting all other forms of oppression and violence. Ableism and racism are intertwined and both are forms of oppression built on white supremacy, which creates social classifications that are used to disempower a subset of society. By removing power from people categorized as BIPOC individuals and those with disabilities, every avenue of abuse is more tolerable, acceptable, and socially supported. This way of thinking is systemic, meaning it is ingrained in every fiber of the U.S., which is why police bias thrives. There are disproportionate numbers of oppressed groups who are incarcerated, abused, and killed at the hands of our justice system. Over half of citizens killed by police have a disability. Black unarmed people are likely to be fatally shot by the police at 3 times the rate of their white peers. The solution is not just training. There has to be a societal shift in power where BIPOC citizens and those with disabilities are empowered to lead the change we need to see. There are approximately 13 million people of color who have disabilities in the United States. To think of racism and ableism as 2 separate parallel systems of oppressions denies the experience of those living in the intersection. Racial disparities in education, employment, and financial security are compounded when we add disability into the mix. The reverse is also true. People with disabilities who are also people of color struggle disproportionately more than their white counterparts. For too long, racism and ableism have worked separately. Disability rights initiatives have often taken a colorblind approach, and then diversity initiatives do not tend to think of disability as an aspect of diversity. Disabled people of color are stuck in the middle because our needs cannot be met through a single issue lens. Rather, an intersectional focus is needed to understand how our multiple identities impact our lives. It is at this intersection that our guest panelists are coming to us. If questions come up, please put them in the chat or hold them until the end of the conversation. All questions will be answered. Our first question is: how can white leaders of organizations and coalitions hold themselves accountable for the harm caused by the impact of their leadership? For example, white leaders who refuse to acknowledge their own biases, privileges, and macro aggressions? Take it away, Helen, Kalila, and Olivia. Who would like to start us off? Thank you for that enlightening.
Helen, why don't you go first?
Okay, so I think that there are a lot of white folks in leadership who are at lots of different points in their journey, right? There are those who refuse to acknowledge their own privilege or bias, much less systemic ableism and racism. And those folks probably aren't in this room right now. Let's be real about that. And some of the folks who are here might be in the unfortunate position of having to navigate around the harm that they do. So I think that having said that, and having acknowledged that many of us in this room may have a lot of wisdom around that, I'm going to invite everyone to add to the conversation in the chat box if you're willing, so that we can all sort of learn from each other's wisdom, because I do think there's a lot of wisdom in this room. Personally, I've seen this handled many different kinds of ways. And I can tell you that the one thing that we shouldn't do is ignore it. To start, and this is just the start, you can get educated about the issues that are relevant to your community and to your organization. And this is the point where I think a lot of white folks kind of stop, because they read all the books and then they think, oh, I'm a good white person, I can stop now, I'm good. But then you actually have to do something, right? So then you have quite a few options from there. So yeah, you could decide to hire a consultant to do deeper training on communication, racial dynamics, and learn to have difficult conversations with each other, and try to make sure it's somebody from the outside of the organization, so you're not dealing with complicated internal dynamics and stuff like that. And you could also decide to restructure your organization to better meet the needs of your community, especially if your organization is run by a lot of white folks and you're primarily serving BIPOC folks. It happens a lot in nonprofit space. So just putting that out there. You could also fortify your professional development programs, start a professional development program. I know a lot of nonprofits kind of lack one. This might be a time where you could build one from the ground up and say, hey, we need diversity trainings that go beyond the basics, right? You could change your hiring practices to account for systemic bias, and you could do all of these in combination with each other. Look at what people are getting paid and see if there are any discrepancies. And eventually you're going to want to step aside and have BIPOC folks drive decisions, because these folks are the ones who are most impacted by the issues, and they're likely going to be the ones best equipped to find the solutions to the issues in their lives, right? For white folks, this is particularly scary, I think, because it involves the perception of having to give up power or money or both. However, I would caution against looking at this as some sort of zero-sum game. And think about how we can grow our resources to make sure that everyone is taken care of.
Thank you. Olivia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, first off, this is a great question, because I personally have experienced this many and many of times. And I ask myself this question because it can be really hard to not just say, I want to change this person, I'm seeing this injustice, how can we combat it? But I have to remind myself that coming at it from an angle of we need to affect change can often not be sustainable, or that person, if they are the ones causing the injustice, the individual or group, may not receive that well. And so I think that it would be better to come with the approach of creating a culture that those mindsets of exclusivity, other than, all of these, that it's just not conducive to the environment that you're creating, all in implementing all these programs like Helen was talking about, and uplifting BIPOC, disabled, marginalized voices, and not in a way that tokenizes them with the expectation of education, but more so coming from a place of celebrating their existence, recognizing that they have these amazing lived experiences and highlighting that. I think I notice another thing with white leadership, especially with white leaders who they themselves are marginalized identities, whether that's being queer, being disabled, whatever have you, that there is an unwillingness to recognize. I think Helen touched on that with saying that there's a loss of power there, to recognize that being white comes first. And I've had interactions with, marginalized groups who are white, who would never say that they're being racist, but they have these very high expectations for me out of the blue. An unwillingness to get to know me, the preconceived idea that I should have it all together, that, you can go on and on and on, but at the core of it, an unwillingness to recognize those biases because of their own discrimination and oppression that they feel. And that is completely valid. Even I myself, with all of my marginalizations, have biases. It is just a product of the society we live in. It's almost norm to have biases against people. And so everybody collectively recognizing that we're going to have biases, but especially white folks willing to come to terms with, I am going to have my biases. If I'm interacting with this person, is there some unconscious biases, discrimination happening? Have I had an experience with a different group? Kind of taking this time to self-analyze your own discrepancies. What am I lacking? Where are the gaps? And that can be really hard. It's not just about relinquishing power, but it's also self-analyzing, and that can be very difficult. I have a hard time with that. And so I think that if you combine all those components, then a culture of promoting diversity, equity, inclusion will be a natural result. And so those toxic ideologies won't be sustained.
Thank you so much. Janita, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I agree with what both Helen and Olivia are speaking to, but I do see some differences, I think, in the way that I perceive the question. I'm looking more at what has been put into the parentheses, that these are the white leaders who refuse to acknowledge their own biases, their own privileges, and they refuse to look at the micro and the macro aggressions. And let's face it, that is probably the crux of the issue. Because if you refuse to see me and who I am and what my obstacles are in the society, what I have to navigate, then you will look at me not from the perspective of what my plight is, but you will see me as this person who walks around probably not giving to the society what you think I ought to be giving to the society. So you would, it's different than being the blaming of the victim. It's about not seeing that I'm able to, or that I have the inroads to the same resources that you have in the society, that I'm kind of outside of that. And so you see these, for example, the micro or the macro aggressions that are put in place, or these obstacles that are put in place, you see those as necessary for the society. Consequently, if I can't navigate those for whatever my reason might be, whether it is about, my being BIPOC in a society that sees me as less than, or my being disabled and unable to move myself into other spaces because I'm different somehow, or you see me as a liability, right? Then you're not going to open up those spaces to me. So the change has to come. I think Helen spoke about some changes, and it's not like, and I think too, Olivia even pointed to, moving these things out the way, the change, so that we have a society that actually looks at me as a viable member to it, rather than me being some kind of individual that is offensive within the environment I'm in. That change then has to take place, or nothing happens. And where does the change have to happen? The change has to happen in individual. I have to change my belief about who you are, BIPOC person, who you are, BIPOC and, with disabilities, who you are, BIPOC woman, African-American, and all the other intersectionalities that come along with it, that puts me way at the back, just on the margins. You have to see me differently. So that's a mindset that we tend not to address. And if you look at policy, if you look at what is happening in our society today, in the laws that are being, just pushed and move rapidly through, those policies are in place not to give me any inroads into the society, but to further close the doors to me. To really solidify almost my non-existence. So I think that privilege has taken on, the octopus arms, where it's reaching everywhere and, in all places. And it has, the impact of it is overwhelmingly negative for those of us who are on the margins. Yes, I see a real mental and a real mental change that has to happen for leaders in order for them to be able to do what is necessary for persons who are experiencing and trying to navigate these obstacles. It just has to be done at that individual level, because that individual then is the one who's going to come up and say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a change. How that person does that, maybe it is by word of mouth. Maybe it is by these types of webinars. Maybe it's someone who's in the webinar taking that information back and saying, listen, you really need to see this. You really need to hear this. But that is where it begins to happen.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I
Thank you
just
for that enlightening conversation. Our next question is, what should all future healthcare providers learn about violence prevention and post-violence support for individuals with disabilities, especially in combination with other oppressed identities? Thank you so much for
Before we answer that, Olivia, did you have a comment for Kalina?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that to really enforce that people who go in to expect, they want to push for change or unwilling to change themselves. And to me, that's how a culture changes. Look, you look throughout history, how is it that, all of these isms with racism was embedded to our society? It still is, but it's more cultural norm to not be racist to your Black friend. How did these mindsets shift? And I think that it's because as individuals within the collective society decide this is not cool to be racist. It's not, it's unkind. Being unkind does not serve me. How can I do better for my neighbor, for my community? How can I do better for myself? And that is something that I've had to learn personally, just shifting those mindsets to be more empathetic and compassionate and kind to others, because I've been empathetic, kind, and compassionate to myself.
Can I also add that in terms of like how that might actually happen is that I've seen in multiple organizations that other leaders in that organization have eventually needed to look at the racism and the ableism and the bias of a particular leader in that organization and said, hey, that person's not going to change and we need to oust them. And it is messy and uncomfortable and not pretty work, but it eventually needed to be done.
Thank you. Let's move on to the question about health care.
So, I do have so to help answer this question, I would like to start with an activity. So before we begin, I'm going to issue a trigger warning for everyone for human trafficking, police violence, and sexual assault. First off, I want to do some level setting here. We must know that most cases of human trafficking are perpetrated by people that the victim already knows. So often it's romantic partners, care staff, friends, clergy, and family members. It is not the case where somebody kidnaps somebody, throws them in a van, and then Olivia Benson from Law and Order SVU has to go save them. Okay. It's also much more common for disabled folks to be targeted for trafficking. According to the latest results from a study by Polaris, that those are the folks who run the National Trafficking Hotline. 59% of survivors report having a disability. I'm going to drop that report in the chat box for everybody, so that you can all take a look at it. Unfortunately, it is one line in a 60-something page report, but that data is there. So with that, we're gonna launch a hypothetical. Sierra, is it possible to launch that now?
Yes, the poll. Wait, the poll?
Yeah, it's a poll / hypothetical. I just reworded it for semantics. I apologize.
Helen, I did put the hypothetical situation in a poll screen.
Okay,
you like
that's
me to
perfect.
read it? Okay.
Actually,
I'll
quick
go
question.
ahead and read it. Yeah.
Was that 59% of survivors? Was that for sexual violence, or was the statistic based off of?
That is based off of trafficking survivors.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes. Yes. So is the poll up?
Okay, all I have is the actual poll. Okay, this system doesn't think that I belong in it, and I do not have access to anything that you need. Paige, can you see if there's a poll question that you can see? I programmed it in and it was working, but now it's showing that I'm not even logged in here. I'm so sorry for this.
It's okay.
technical
I'm seeing on
difficulty.
my end that there's one poll that ended,
Okay.
and that is what systems are at play. Do you want me to relaunch it or show the results?
Yes, relaunch that. But Helen, it doesn't have the story attached to it. You'll have to say that.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay.
I can read that if it would be helpful.
I can go ahead and read that.
My apologies. I think I misunderstood the directions.
Okay, no worries. I'll go ahead and read that. So I'm gonna read out a hypothetical for all of you, and hopefully y'all can follow along. So you work at a busy community health center where you and the other healthcare provider, actually, you know what I'll do? I'm going to copy and paste and share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay, I can't do that. All right, never mind. I'm just going to read it out to you. All right, so you work at a busy community health center where you and the other healthcare provider have around 7 to 10 minutes to see each patient. It's Friday afternoon, and you've already seen 34 patients, and you had to skip lunch to catch up on your morning rush. And the waiting room is once again filled with people. Annette, a Black woman with a cognitive disability, comes in with her father to see you about a knee injury that's looking infected. You notice bruises on her inner thigh. This should be a red flag for abuse. Her father says that she had an accident, and you note that she goes quiet. Okay, so this is big red flag number 2, a change in demeanor after asking about the bruising. You have to decide whether or not to make a report. You have to decide whether to make a report to Adult Protective Services, to call the police, or to end the appointment and move on to the next patient. Things to consider. On your end, a call to Adult Protective Services takes 45 minutes, and that would force you to work until 9 p.m. tonight. Calling the police would close the room for however long it takes for them to investigate the situation, and the administration is putting pressure on providers to treat more patients because Medicaid payments are the lowest in the state. For Annette, things are looking pretty grim. She is being trafficked by her father, who is her conservator. She does not want to go to the police because the last time she did that, the officer turned around and assaulted her. At the encouragement of a hotline worker, she has tried to find other housing, but the shelters are full and rentals are too expensive for her disability checks to cover. In addition, the Section 8 wait list in her area is about a decade long. There is one crisis center in her area where she might be able to get legal help to contest her conservatorship, but that is about 2 hours away on public transit if there are any delays, or if there aren't any delays. Now, I want you all to think about what systems are at play here and click what you think. What do you think? What systems are at play here? And I'll give you a few moments to decide.
Paige, go ahead and launch the poll, please.
It is launched.
Is anybody seeing that?
Yeah,
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Paige.
Okay, once you get the poll results, can you send me the results? I do not see it on my end, unfortunately.
Sure, people are still responding. We have about a 63% answer right now. Let me know when you want to end it and I can get you the results.
Okay. I
Right
would say
now it's
critical. Okay.
pretty
Go ahead.
even across the board with 90% of people saying all of the above.
Okay, have we got like around 70% of people answering?
Yeah, 68%.
Okay. And what are the results?
It's pretty even across the board with a majority of people saying all of the above, 91%.
Okay, beautiful. So if you said all of the above, you are indeed correct. And the point of this poll is to illustrate to you that, oh, thank you. Oh my gosh, I see the results now. Beautiful. Okay, so the point of this poll is to illustrate for you and to help answer this question of, okay, what should the healthcare providers think about and in terms of healthcare prevention and post-violent support is that while healthcare as an institution and all of our institutions often behave as little silos when we're dealing with them on a day-to-day basis, they're really deeply connected in the ways that they prioritize certain folks over others. And it has a cumulative effect on people when it comes out and you interact with somebody in a healthcare setting, right? Our current system makes it incredibly difficult to prevent violence against disabled BIPOC folks effectively, and leaves it up to individual healthcare workers or teachers, et cetera, to do unpaid labor to intervene. Because like I said, you only get 7 to 10 minutes per patient, and your administrators are pushing you to see more because your Medicaid payments are not covering enough staff for you to actually take the time to take care of your patients adequately, right? So when somebody is coming in with needs that are outside of like your basic scope of healthcare, then what do? And then when you're talking about somebody who has been impacted by multiple systems of oppression and has been taken advantage of and brutalized by people in power over her, then what happens?
Thank you, Helen. That was a great hypothetical. Camila, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it kind of like hits home, doesn't it? To see that and to know that this happens every day, all across the country, that a person, because of systems, or having to, as you present it, having to see so many people in order for you to make the status quo for that day, or to have the numbers for that day, or to make the have the income for that day for this organization, then those needs of the person goes unmet. And unfortunately, we as a society don't look at that and see that as being significantly in error. We don't look at that and say, that, persons who are, maybe they're the elderly, or they have some other disability, definitely BIPOC, living below economic means, in poverty, all of these other things. The society looks at most of that, and we're groomed to look at most of that and to normalize that as being, well, that's just the way things are. That person, is receiving some kind of benefit, and so they ought to be doing better. So we put other types of things onto ideas, onto persons that they cannot surmount. So along with what is, probably you're looking at, some physical, disabilities, but what about, all of the weight that happens, and then, mental disabilities, emotional, that happens within a person that, keeps them suppressed by this oppressive society. Healthcare systems do not while they have the, I don't know what they call it, hypocritical, or if I call it Hippocratic, I don't know if it's Hippocratic or Hippocratic, but whatever oath they take is not really functioning. Because if it were functioning, then persons would look at, you know, the community that they are working with a more humane view, a more humane lens. And this simply is not doing that. Then you have all these other, as you pointed out, now there are services, yes. You know, you have transportation there, you have the legal systems there, the law enforcement there, the housing there, social services for disabilities. Let's not forget social services for the elderly. It's very different from that, which is, you know, CPS. It's an offshoot like for in that same realm. So you have all of these services, but none of these services are actually working to benefit. They're working for the dollars. They're working for the numbers. They're not working to benefit the individual to whom, you know, is coming there. And when you get involved, you see other obstacles that has to be navigated. And if you're not navigating all of these different obstacles at all the same time, and, you know, I have clients who, you know, they have to be here, they have to be there at the same time, they have to be over here, they have to do this, they have to do that. All of these different systems that are weighing down on persons and creating then this another form of violence within that person, because that's exactly what it is. But we normalize it as help. Violence is normalized as help. And so we have to think about that too, that the changing of systems. And again, how do we do that? How do we get persons to change their way of operating, or by changing, you know, just the way that they look at who it is that you're saying that you're helping, and how is this system really helping? And if not, how can you change that structure so that it is helpful?
Thank you so much. Olivia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I want to start out by just sharing a personal experience that I've had with the healthcare system, specifically with the psychiatric healthcare system. I was having, you know, social anxiety. I grew up with trauma as a child, didn't realize it till later. And so I'm having all of these symptoms, mental health struggles. Maybe I should go see a psychiatrist. So I go to a psychiatrist. Of course, it is a white, cis, older man, which often my psychiatrists are that. I'm going to the psychiatrist, reporting all of these symptoms, and without much investigation, I get prescribed a various amount of psychiatric medication. Now, you know, at the time, I didn't think much of it. He's the expert. He knows better than I do. And I just left it at that. But, you know, these medications did not do me well. And I ended up in a psychiatric facility because of the weight of all of these compounding medications going on. And in that psychiatric facility, I'm getting a similar treatment with the in-house psychiatrist and even the staff that diagnosed me with oppositional defiant disorder, schizoaffective tendencies, because they're keeping me in-house for much longer than they said. I thought I was leaving today. I get frustrated. Instead of unleashing my full anger, I just rip up pieces of paper and I clean up after myself. But I got written with those disorders as this person has, you know, as a danger to others. But because of those experiences, I'm like, I don't think that this is maybe all available there. And so going to another psychiatrist, having a sit down, And that person was very much more inquisitive and curious about where these mental health problems are coming from and what's the root of them, and is baffled by how many medications that I am on. And looking back at the situation, you can take it however you will. I feel that the stigmas associated with my makeup, whether it's because I'm Black, I'm evidently queer, maybe that's why, but all of these marginalizations, I feel like that psychiatrist and that facility did not take into account those stigmas as the angry Black, woman, all of these things. And so they're attaching all of these diagnoses, all of that on top of something that's just a matter of, I have extreme trauma, I haven't processed through it. What are remedies to help process through that? And so I think, I've heard that experience with others, that healthcare providers aren't willing to take into account those stigmas that are already present in society when addressing BIPOC patients, disabled patients, that, they just attach all those on there. So a patient is left with the receiving violent care because they are unwilling to have their story heard, be seen, be heard, and have my experience be validated, because they just see me for who I am, which isn't really seeing me. They just artificially look at me, clock me, and say, okay, well, here you go, here's your medications. And that whole experience, really, before that, I have a hard time seeing racial discrimination, whether it be because I grew up mainly in white dominated churches, institutions, what have you. And it really took me back at just how embedded these biases are within medical care, and so I think it's very important for healthcare providers to have those stigmas in place, and to also look at all the various intersectional identities, as to why a person may also be struggling, and not coming from a place of, oh, you're disabled, it's no wonder that you're depressed. How invalidating and verbally violent is that? I'm not, yes, I have these barriers that society prevents me because I am disabled cognitively, mentally, however you have it. But it's not my disability, it's not my identity that, contributes to depression, anxiety. It is all these barriers. And so especially in the mental health care field, to acknowledge that, and just do better to combat that. I know that we say all this, it's easier said than done, because it does come back to a change of self, a willingness to recognize those biases. And it often is in the mental health care field, especially with doctors, those who get higher paid paychecks. They're unwilling to relinquish that power, to come with terms, because that's a loss of money. That is a loss that, we see that with Khalil's example. We see that with Helen's example, that institutions are not willing to relinquish their power because doing so will be a loss in profit, not because, it's a loss of profit because of the system is designed to be violent, to not be conducive to folks who are presented these barriers. It almost increases the barriers. So yeah, it's very heavy. I mean, obviously I have very personal experiences with the healthcare system. I've been to many of a facility, many a medication, many a psychiatrist, and this is a constant thing, that it's a culture created in healthcare fields, not just mental health, but with other hospitals. I have been laughed at while I'm having I'm seizing on the table, and the nurse is standing above me laughing at me because I'm making it up, because you know, and that's another thing with Black people, we over exaggerate. That's another stigma. And so it's something that hits very close to home. And yeah.
Thank you, Olivia. That was really vulnerable.
May I say something, Jennifer, to that?
Yeah,
Because Olivia, you hit on so many, oh my God, so many points. Wonderful. Just really just feeding my soul here. If we get around to the narrative that we all are inundated with in some way or another, the narrative that is been written about, you know, BIPOC people, and especially BIPOC people with disabilities, whatever those disabilities may be. And then it continues to then move through the society and again, normalize. It's almost as if you see a person who has a disability, then your mind goes to what other disability does that person have other than what I'm looking at. You begin to do that. And so it becomes easy when you get in front of this person who has this power for all of the labels to be dumped on you just because you're responding very naturally to a very chaotic and very violent and very oppressive situation where your voice is not being heard. Who I am and what I know myself to be and what I know is happening within me is dismissed because the book says that you are this, that, and the third. And long time ago, long time ago, I had a similar experience, Olivia, and I was diagnosed as a manic depressive, schizophrenic, dissociative. And I'm like, whoa, what does all of this really mean, right? And you're trying to convince me of this. You're trying to convince me that because I'm experiencing what is really a social oppression that is so overwhelming and taking me into these places where I'm depressed because I don't see a way or, you know, or have any hope about coming from up under all of this weight of the social stigmas that I'm under. You see me as then my mental health is this. No, it's not. My mental health is, I'm struggling so hard to just be who I am and have the voice and be seen and be heard. I want you to recognize that I'm frustrated. I want you to recognize that I'm sad. I want you to recognize that I'm feeling, you know, a bit of, you know, depression. But I can't say that word too loud because that's going to send you really into something and you're going to give me some medicine, you know, for your depression. Rather than say, well, you know, these are some avenues for you. So when the landscape of that narrative is being painted by someone in power, it always comes back to how violent you can be to another human being. And where is your humanity? What are you doing about your humanity? I love where it has been said that, you know, this is happening in you. All of this stuff is happening in the individual who is creating that environment of that is so attacking to another person for the power, the control, the monetary success, you know, and all these other things. And so it's really unfortunate that we don't have enough people at those levels who are willing to say that, you know, I'm going to lend my expertise in this, I'm going to lend my doctorate in this way, you know, in order to help and understand something, that this is historical. This is not anything that just happened. This has been the way that the condition is, and it's only changing in different time zones, so to speak, or time sets, to look like the appearance of something better. Well, yeah, you're not strapping, you know, persons with disabilities to a table. You know, you're not strapping them to a table and injecting them with some kind of serum or locking them in with some kind of electrodes. Well, no, you're not doing that. You're more humane now. You just give them a bunch of pills in order for you to see what the brain is doing and how it's doing. So we have to recognize that these things of how we treat people, you know, who we believe is, again, outside of, you know, the control that we can have over them. Those persons are treating the marginalized community in a way that we do not have voice, we do not have face, we have no identity. And it's unfortunate. And that does bring about depression. It's going to bring about more than that if we don't have persons who are, you know, creating an environment that is going to be one of humanity. And how do I care for these people in the correct way? How do I give myself over to being more of a voice for persons who are marginalized? How do I do that? How do I set up systems and structures that's going to promote the healthiness and the wellness of being for these persons? How am I going to do that?
Thank you so much. Any other thoughts?
I do. Thank you, Jennifer. And you know, I just adding on to everything that everybody said, you know, sorry, I got dual monitors over here. But I'm just so happy that we're all talking about this. I think that this is not talked about enough. I myself am disabled, and one of the main reasons why I lost trust in the healthcare system was because, you know, once being told, you know, it's all in your head, you know, and then finding out later that I need a spinal fusion, that I'm going to be disabled for the rest of my life, having to take medications on top of medications, and the chronic pain adding to depression, and then not recognizing that the depression was caused by the pain, but more saying that the depression is causing the pain that's in my head. And not being taken seriously. I don't know if you saw my past comment, but even with first responders and having PTSD myself, you know, it's one of those hidden disabilities as well, where it's not taken seriously. There's not enough knowledge about it in our systems, and how we can kind of switch that around to, okay, you know what, maybe I don't know what's going on. Maybe I should do more research, instead of pushing the I don't know, it's all in your head onto patients. And the whole like medication on top of medication talk, that was truly enlightening, because I was once on 24 medications for, you know, having, you know, depression, you know, chronic PTSD and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was once on 24 pills, right, a day. And each day I was like, I wish someone would just take me off of everything to see what these are all doing. There's no way that these aren't interacting with each other, right? So it's just, I'm really glad we're having this conversation. I think it affects more people than we know.
Thank you. We are going to go on to our next question. We have about 15 minutes left. The next question is, how does addressing ableism and racism prevent violence? Olivia, do you want to go?
If anybody else has any other thoughts that they would contribute first, this is also a very good question. And I need some time to brew.
Okay, Helen.
Yeah. So I think that addressing both of these issues at the same time brings like a mindset of systemic solutions to the forefront rather than individual solutions to the forefront in terms of like the way that we approach things, right? So if we come at systemic ableism and systemic racism first, and approach them together and say, hey, actually, let's start with the Medicaid system and say, all right, well, why are Medicaid payments the lowest in the state? And why do we only operate on fee for service? And why do people only have access to healthcare in certain instances? And then that leads to, okay, why are healthcare centers so pitifully staffed? And why don't healthcare staff have time to adequately attend to their patients? And it goes on, and you start drilling down to the individual level, right? It could be an interesting and I think fruitful way to think about policy. And then it could also, you could also start thinking about prevention, not just in terms of smaller programs, but actually creating an ecosystem where folks are not set up to be made vulnerable to violence, right? Because after study after study shows that yes, well, anybody can be trafficked, right? Certain people are targeted for trafficking because certain things make them vulnerable: social isolation, being disabled, being a person of color, being involved in the foster care system. And those are all things that can be impacted by systemic racism and systemic ableism. In my own case, like, the ways that I was abused, like, my abuser could lock into systems and say, oh, this is just how Chinese kids act, or this is just how Chinese parents parent their kids, because teachers in my area had no idea that actually those were signs of abuse, right? So that's what I have to say. Does anybody else have anything to add?
How about you, Galena?
Well, oh, wow, this one is this one is heavy. This one is heavy. I think that it is something that we have always been trying to do, actually. For me, I've been around quite a while, you all. And I've seen this discrimination, this unjust discrimination and practices, you know, as a result of being, you know, Black woman, you know, having all of the stereotypes associated with my just stepping into the spaces. When we look at and we put together, then, as you know, Helen is suggesting, okay, let's look at all of these together, because I'm, you know, in the case of how we look at, you know, persons, or we see persons who are disabled and they're standing next to, or they're in the company of, or in the spaces of able-bodied persons, and they are being then looked at as a non-entity. And then we want to attach to that person who's disabled, you know, any one of the BIPOC. I don't care which one you want to associate. That's, you know, go with me. We're going to see that person become less and less as a figure in the space. We all know that. The way that I think that it becomes violent is that because we do that, we then too begin, you know, persons who are able-bodied, who's looking at this person as a non-entity, is already now set that person up for failure in whatever area that it is in. They set that person up to be, you know, accosted. They set that person up to be, you know, trampled on, or, you know, talked down to, you know, or to have some other experience of aggression from whomever else is in that space, without, you know, coming to that person's defense and treating that person, you know, with the respect of humanity, just as being here, period, not looking at all the other. And I think that that is attached to racism, because you look at me as being something different because of the color of my skin. You will treat me with that inferiority, that I somehow don't reach a standard for you. And that's violent to my personhood, because if I don't reach a standard for you, then most anything can happen to me. If I'm in the company of you and others like you who do not have my well-being at heart. And we see this oftentimes. There was a young man who was taken down, thrown down, put into a chokehold because he was experiencing, you know, an episode, a mental break. But because people looking at him saw him as a threat, not saw his being disabled in any way, mentally disabled in any way. They saw him just as a threat, but they saw him as a threat when they saw the color of his skin. So they didn't look past that. So we have to see then that persons who are able and not BIPOC don't look at all of the different things that you are. They look at one thing that you are. And that one thing that you are already now causes them to feel unsafe. And so how do I deal with being unsafe? I attack you. I harm you before you harm me. An officer puts, you know, 3 bullets into a person, you know, rapid fire, shoots them in the chest because that officer says, I felt unsafe. There's no weapons. This person has no weapons. This person has nothing at all. But they feel unsafe. And that becomes, you know, something of a, oh, okay, he felt unsafe, you know, and we move on, or at least we used to. Now we're asking more questions, right? Because we can document this stuff as it happens now. You know, or a person can call the police to come and handle this situation because oh, this person here, this person standing here. Well, this is a tall, you know, big BIPOC person. And, you know, I feel threatened. I need someone, and you rush in. So we have to look at what is being seen first. And then why is it then that if you have additionally a disability, that a person will attack you or hold you somehow in contempt of their ableism? How does that happen? I don't even understand that one. Somehow you're in contempt of me. I don't know how that happened.
Okay, I hate to interrupt, but I want to give Olivia the chance to say something.
Yeah, and this is just, I think, a great ending note that as you leave the webinar and you've got all these beautiful nuggets of wisdom, and you want to develop strategies in your own internal organization, your own personal self, whatever have you, I think it is very important to not feel shame, especially when we say that change starts at the individual level with the self. It can be very hard to not put the blame on yourself, on, you know, that I'm not doing enough, what have you. And shame leads to apathy, it leads to resentment, to resistance. And I think that's exactly what a system designed to be the way exactly it is. Somebody had mentioned in the chat, our system isn't broken. It is designed exactly how it is supposed to be. And so they want us to remain apathetic to people, to feel shame, because it all boils down to personal responsibility. And yes, it's good for the individual to do some self-analyzation, because that's just a great thing to do, to continue to grow, to continue to evolve. But it truly takes away the responsibility on those systems of power when you feel shame that, you know, I can't do this, I'm always going to be the perpetrator, I'm always going to have these biases, and that's a weight of an oppression in of itself. But when we collectively come together to community build, because that's not what they want us to do. They don't want us to all team together. They want us to be broken apart. But when we can come together and say, yes, I do have some biases. Yeah, I recognize that. But I want to do better for myself. I want to do better for others, and so that we can all collectively come together and not fight the system, but fight for the people impacted by the system.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all the panelists. This was a great discussion, and I wish we had more time. You can see the contact info on the screen, and we will get you the PowerPoint within a day. Thank you so much for coming. Don't forget to visit us on the web. Thank you.